So we're now on part 4 of Perception of the Self and Others, and we're going to go into self-fulfilling prophecies. You might be asking, why is Harry Potter on here? Or you might be saying, well, he's holding a crystal ball, which is attributed to prophecies. So this connects. Yes and no. I want to first point out, because self-fulfilling prophecy or prophecies is a term often used in fictional storytelling, and that's why Harry Potter's on here. I want to differentiate the two different types. So first, there's the narrative or fictional version of self-fulfilling prophecies that we often read about or we see in film or TV, and then often in fantasy. And there's also the one we're going to go over, which is the real world perception-based psychological effects that prophecies have on ourselves, that we set for ourselves and then other people set for us, but really we've just adopted those and applied them to ourselves. So first, what is a self-fulfilling prophecy in fiction? So if you know Harry Potter, this is more in the books actually than the films, but Harry Potter has been sought after by Lord Voldemort because there's a prophecy that states that there is a boy who's about to be born who's going to defeat Voldemort. And Voldemort hears part of this prophecy, and he could pick 2 boys. Only 2 boys fit this. It's Neville Longbottom or it's Harry Potter. He decides to go after Harry Potter. And in doing so, he marks Harry Potter as his equal. Now, if Voldemort had heard the full prophecy, which Harry is holding here, if he'd heard the full one from day one, he probably wouldn't have gone after either, right? Because what it is in fiction is basically somebody has a prophecy assigned to them, and in trying to prevent it from happening, they actually put it into action. So this prophecy states that this boy is gonna defeat Voldemort because Voldemort marks him as his equal and blah, blah, blah. And in trying to avoid this from happening, or Voldemort goes after Harry and then marks him as his equal, which then creates this whole thing. So this also is part of Game of Thrones, which is partially shown in the actual show, where Cersei tries to keep her prophecy from coming true, that her children will die, blah, blah, blah. But in trying to keep them from dying, they end up dying. Like, she's the one who sets it into motion. This is not the same thing. Maybe a little bit similar. Maybe not. A self-fulfilling prophecy really is, and you're probably pretty familiar with this, and this is not like a set thing where this is always going to happen. There are times where people say, like, you're never going to make it in this field or whatever, and just out of spite, we're like, we're gonna make it, and it encourages us more to work harder. So it doesn't always happen, but it happens often. A self-fulfilling prophecy is really when we hold an expectation for ourselves, and then so I'm at the top here, and then we go to the next one where it says we behave in accordance with that expectation, which makes that expectation then come to pass, which then makes us think, see, I was right from the beginning, which goes back to holding that expectation. Now, this could be negative or positive. So, you might have had maybe if you're involved with sports, you might have had a coach or maybe a teacher or even a parent or a sibling or a friend who may have given you some negative comments about what you're capable of or what you'll become or what you can do with yourself. And the thing is as much as, even if we consciously understand it's nonsense, it does affect us. So basically, those people hold expectations for us, and then we adopt them. And that's number 2 here, the ones that people create for us. But we also create our own for ourselves. So for a long time, I told myself, I'm not going to finish school. Like, I don't have it in me to really care about school or to want to do my homework. And then like each month it became easier and easier to just neglect all of my studies and assignments in high school, until I finally had lowered my expectations for myself and made excuses for myself and convinced myself so much through the self-fulfilling prophecy that I wasn't going to do it, that I was able to just drop out. And I did. I dropped out of high school in, I think it was October of 2000, the beginning of my senior year. And then later I started at a college, a community college where I now teach, without a GED, without a diploma. And my dad, who was a professor at Cal State LA, was like, just, I can get you in here, just get your GED. And I told him, I said, I'm not going to do well because I don't want to. Like, I'm not like that driven. I know I'm just going to like skirt it off. So no. So I basically held this expectation of myself that I was not going to do well. And then I fulfilled it. Years later, after leaving college for 4 years, I came back and I decided I'm going to do well. I'm going to do well. And I didn't even have my GED yet. And I did. I got straight A's. I got academic probation. I did so well. However, the second semester back, I met a professor who really encouraged his students to do well and pointed out who did the best, who wrote the best essay, and made everybody come to office hours and really just built our morale up. And he encouraged me to do better. He pointed out how capable I was. I believed him. He set a self-fulfilling prophecy for me. He then said, you should be an SI leader, a supplemental instruction leader, which is somewhere between a tutor and an instructor. He said, you should apply for that program, which made me, I had to go get my GED then. So I went and got it. Almost 30. And I never would have applied for this program otherwise, because I always thought, like, I'm a high school dropout. Like, I can't do that. But he was like, yeah, you can. And I believed him. He set that prophecy for me. I adopted it. I did it. And then he said, you need to apply for the honors program. And I was like, no. And he's like, just do it. And I did it, and I got in. And then he told me to apply for two, well, it was 2 different years, but 2 different, one each year, for scholarships. I won both. And then I won 3 essay contests. And I never would have even thought it possible. And I never even bothered to do any of these on my own if it weren't for him. So the prophecies we set for ourselves are super important, but the ones others set for us, because we adopt them, whether we realize we're doing so or not, are also equally important. And they can go both ways. I mean, even in when I was at a university later, I vividly remember studying for an exam, and as I'm studying, I'm getting more and more demoralized, and I'm like, I'm not going to do well, but I have to do well. And then a day later, I'm like, well, I'm not going to do well. A C is fine, but it's not. And then a day later, I'm like, a C is okay. And who cares if I fail? And then all of a sudden, like, I'm getting a bad grade on something because I've felt that I'm now behaving in accordance with the expectation that I've set up. So self-fulfilling prophecies are incredibly powerful. The expectations we hold for ourselves, the expectations other people put onto us, are incredibly powerful. And it's really important, therefore, that we surround ourselves with people who are not toxic, who are not abusive, who are not trying to bring us down. Sometimes we have people in our lives who sometimes are really good for us, but then like something happens and they're really toxic. Just get rid of all of that. You only want to surround yourself with people who are good for you. I had a boyfriend, the last boyfriend I had, who, when I got into grad school, and he was like, I love you so much, and I believed him. And then the night I got into grad school, we went to a bar and celebrated with all our friends, and we left that bar, and he just screamed at me that I wasn't that smart, I didn't deserve this, blah, blah, and it was hard not to take that seriously, and it's been 7 years, and it's still hard not to take that seriously. Not to even think of that, even though I know that it was born of bitterness, and unhappiness on his part. So avoid people like that, because they do have an impact on you. Also, another reason this is really important to understand is because you have an impact on other people. The communication you have with other people, maybe you're angry and you're like, yeah, well, whatever, you're not going to make anything of yourself, or you're not going to do well in this field, or maybe you tell people that they are. You have a huge influence on other people's psyche, and you have, therefore, a big responsibility to communicate with an ethical lens, to think about how your words are going to affect other people before you say them. And maybe you're talking to someone you don't necessarily like, but that doesn't mean anything. That just means that you don't like them. It doesn't mean that they're not worth something. And so you still need to think about your own responsibility as a communicator, because what you say to them can affect them forever. There are things that people said to me when I was 16 years old, and I'm almost 42, and they said things to me that they just said in passing about, whether it was my body or my ability or anything like that, that still affect how I see myself and how I function and how I then go about, or what I think I'm capable of. You have no idea how your words are going to affect other people. Therefore, you need to communicate with that weight and that acknowledgement of that weight on your shoulders, that you have a huge responsibility. So as much as we think of self-fulfilling prophecies and how they affect us, don't forget that you also affect other people. You also are the bearer of self-fulfilling prophecies for other people as well. Okay, moving on. Influences on perception. This is a big thing. Access to information, physiological influences, psychological, social, and cultural. And we're going to go over mostly access to information. Before we go over that, however, I do want to point out cultural influences are very often invisible, but they're most often the biggest factor in our perceptions. Because if we're not bicultural and we haven't traveled a whole lot and we're not exposed to a lot of different, like we don't have friends who are from different cultures or different countries, it's really hard to even recognize that the perceptions we have are based a lot in our culture. Cultures set up social norms and social expectations. If you've ever seen things on TV or a movie and you're like, that's weird, like why are these people from I don't know, Asia doing this? Like that's not normal here. Well, it's normal to them, and what we do is not normal. You know what I mean? Like, so how you perceive them is based, because your whole culture is the basis for how you judge other people and how you perceive everything around you. My mentor, Eva, who was my first communication studies professor, is from Sweden, and she was talking to me about how, when her, I mean, she's like from Sweden, how, when her daughter turned 15, like she would give her daughter wine at dinner every night at home. And I was like, what? Like, that's so irresponsible. But the thing was, that's her cultural norm. And even though she was in the US, that's still like that normal thing where she comes from. And maybe we see it differently and we're like, well, but what about the laws here? And I'm not sure, I'm not clear on the laws of what happens inside the home, but still, we see things through our own cultural lens. It affects our perception in ways that are probably the biggest, but also the most unknown to us. We're not really aware of how much it's affecting us, which is ironic because it has the biggest effect. All right, so moving on to, apart from, I mean, I don't want to put more weight on any of these than the others, because they can all, depending on the situation and what you're perceiving, they could all hold more weight than the other ones. Each one has a big part to play depending on the context, depending on the situation. However, what I come in contact and what I see most often being an issue, especially given the time that we're living in, the age of social media. I'm a millennial. I'm an old millennial. Sometimes people call us Zennials. It's like a 4-year period where Gen X and millennials kind of overlap. I was born in 1983, so I remember, Zennials remember very vividly a time without not just social media, but the internet, because social media came much later. Um, and we grew up and came of age and became adults in this time before this happened. But we also were young enough that we acclimated to it very quickly, and it's really a part of our personality. And we kind of have a unique understanding of, and a unique perspective of how social media has shaped us, but also how what it was like beforehand. And a lot of, I'm not saying that Gen X and baby boomers don't also have that, but there is something unique about this kind of like period of time that I belong to. And I've got to say, like, it is really kind of difficult to grapple with that sometimes, because access to information becomes more and more of an issue as far as I'm seeing. It's always been an issue, but now it's a bigger issue. And the fact is that access to information and how it influences our perception is always an issue. It's never like, it's never like all of a sudden, like, you know, you don't know what's going on here, so you give somebody, like, you know, you judge them based on whatever. Even with the people closest to us in our lives, like the very closest people, our parents, our siblings, our best friends, our partners, all of that, we never have all the information. It's just like when we talked about encoding and decoding, there's always something lost. And sometimes whatever's lost is insignificant. It's like maybe some kind of context that really doesn't matter when it comes to the meaning. Sometimes it's something a little bit bigger, and then sometimes it's so big that it changes the way somebody decodes a message entirely, to where it's like not even the same meaning. And access to information can do that. So, for example, think about when you're watching a film or a TV show. Excuse me one second. I don't know why I had it over here. Think about when you're watching a story on, whether it's TV or a film, or you're reading a book, and there's a character who everybody all of a sudden, or some people in the story are like raging against, or they're like, oh, this person's this, like, has this personality, or they're crazy, or they're weird, or whatever it is, but like they're judging it based on one incident, or maybe a few incidents that you, the viewer or the reader, or, you know, the consumer, know more about, because the writer has given you those details, but the other characters don't. And you might find yourself getting frustrated, like sometimes, like, really, like, frustrated, to where you're like, I need to put this book down, or I need to turn off this movie for a minute, because it's so infuriating, because you're just like, I just need the rest of these characters to find out what I know. And because fiction is written with that agenda, the people always, or almost always, find out, you know, they always find out, like, the information that you know by the end, and it changes their perspective. However, in real life, it's the same thing, but other people don't always find out. So, you know, art imitates life, life imitates art. This is a real thing. It's not like, oh, which one is it? No, it is a constant circle. It is cyclical. It is like, they feed off of each other. And we learn a lot from narratives, but we don't often learn enough, because that's one message I think a lot of us miss, that when we're watching a story, or we're consuming a story, we forget that it's the same thing in real life. So, you know, for example, even if we go back a few years to, you know, the Black Lives Matter, like the height of the Black Lives Matter movement, this is always a thing, but like the height of the Black Lives Matter movement, and you had people searching for reasons to, you know, to suggest that it was okay to shoot this one person. This person committed a crime, or they did this in their past, or whatever it is. And the fact is, think about it from your point of view. Like, you don't have all the information. You don't know why they committed that crime, whether it was justified or not. You know, because sometimes crimes can be justified as far as ethics goes. Law is not the top of the ethics pyramid. I feel like I need to elaborate on that, because it could be misconstrued. There's a common thing when you're studying ethics, a common, like, scenario that ethics instructors will give you. Like, if you know someone who is dying and they desperately need a medication, but their insurance company won't give it to them. And it's like, they can either die or you could steal it from a pharmacy. Is it wrong to break into a pharmacy and steal it if that pharmacy is insured on that medication and blah, blah, blah? Like, would you rather what's more ethical, to obey the law or, you know, to save somebody's life? That's just an ethical scenario that some people give. So that's just an example of what I'm saying. I'm not saying that's always the case. Often laws are ethical. Most often they are. But there's always some kind of thing going on, right? But at the same time, like, somebody had a counterfeit, like, $20 bill. I think this is something that people were saying about George Floyd. And the fact you could just like, well, they should have shot him. It was okay to shoot him because of that. That is primitive and weird. To say that. But at the same time, I think about something in your past or your present and think that if somehow something happened to you and it was in the news and all the information that the public had was this one bad thing that you've done or this one negative thing that people don't know the context of, and so they see it more negatively than they should, and that's all the information they have about your character, who you are as a person. All of us have stuff like that. I mean, I could be killed and the press could, leak several things about me and that's all the public would know. And they'd be like, she was an awful person. Because none of us are perfect, right? So access to information is a huge thing. It's not always about like, are they good or bad? Sometimes it's about like, you just misconstrue something or you judge something without all the context. And the fact is you're never going to have all the context. You never are. So you always need to leave that little bit of room there, as a buffer to be like, okay, maybe I shouldn't like judge this person or judge the situation in its entirety, because you at least need to be like, I'm judging this maybe, but I'm also acknowledging that I don't have all the information. Now, another extreme example from my actual life. So about 15 years ago, I was driving to Starbucks and I was turning, if you know Rancho Cucamonga, I was going south on Archibald. I was turning left into this parking lot that has a Starbucks right before Foothill, right? These are two very busy streets. And I have cars coming at me, coming through the intersection, and I'm trying to go in a hurry. From the right side of me, in like a lane that's supposed to go straight, comes this woman screeching, making a U-turn around my car, cutting these people off who are coming forward that I'm trying to get ahead of. So I'm diagonal. They're coming at me. They're all slamming on their brakes. She has her window down, and she just starts she's screaming, "Get that F out of my effing way!" And I just remembered this vividly, and all of us are just like at a halt. I mean, like just slamming on her brakes. And for years I was like, that woman was crazy. She should not have been driving. She obviously has some problems with her mental health, blah, blah, blah. And even through school, I didn't think much more of it until my daughter was in 4th grade. She's 14 now, so it doesn't feel that long ago, but it was. I guess she was 9 years old, and at 4th grade, people can walk home from school, from their elementary, without a parent. We didn't even have to cross a street from her elementary school. She literally left, turned right, and it was like our building in this apartment complex. My mom calls me like 30 minutes after she's supposed to be home. I am on the way home, stopping at a friend's house to show them my new car that I just leased. Brand new car. And I'm like, yeah, look at my new car. And my mom calls me she's like, Isabel's still not home. And I just I'm like, what? I'm like, have you called the police? Blah, blah, blah. She's like, no, the principal's in our apartments, looking for her and blah, blah. And I'm like, call the police. And she's like, well, so I call the police. I jump in my car. My friend lives in an apartment complex where like the road kind of goes swerve, swerve, swerve. And then out to Lemon. It's like a snake. And I'm in my brand new car that is not mine, it's leased. And I do not care if I crash this thing. And I start screeching around corners on the phone with the police. And there's, in this apartment complex at my friend's apartments, there's this really nice guy who I've seen before in his golf cart. And he's waving at people walking their dogs. And he's like, hello there. And then he looks at me and he's like, And I'm just like, my window's down and I just start screaming, get out of my effing way, like on the phone with the police. And he's just like, oh, like, and he realized that I didn't care if I ran him over. I had to get out of there. And not at the moment, but after I found my daughter safe, like hanging out in the middle of the apartments, doing nothing, staring at a tree or something after she hung out with her friends without permission. After that and I had calmed down, I realized, oh my God, I'm that woman. I'm that woman. And for years I've been judging this woman, like she must be insane. Maybe she was, but more likely she was going through something that I didn't have the information about. Like I wasn't privy to what was going on in her life. All of us have bad days. All of us are going through something. There's more to the story always. So when we perceive something, just always remember, whether it's drastic or whether it's bad or whether it's good, that you never have all the information. Ever. Okay. 12 minutes later. All right. We're at the end of this lecture now. So these are common tendencies in perception. We tend to make snap judgments. First of all, these are just basically human traits. We tend to make snap judgments. We cling to first impressions. However, like the idea that first impressions stick with us forever and they don't change is kind of nonsense. We judge ourselves more charitably than we do others. We're influenced by our expectations and the obvious, and we assume others are like us. So we often assume that how we would understand a situation or how we would respond to a situation, that's how everybody should respond. And that's just kind of a natural thing we do, but we really need to catch ourselves in that. One thing that has to do with this is attributions. So how we explain other people's behavior, we tend to want to like attribute it to something. And often when it's somebody else, we attribute it to their internal traits. Even when it's like external things that cause this or that mostly caused it, we're like, no, it's because this person's like this. Something that we do here is like stereotyping as an example of this, where we're like, hey, like this person did this because maybe they're this sex or this race, or, you know, they have this sexual orientation, or they have a lot of tattoos, so of course they're going to commit a crime, or whatever it is. We're like, we're kind of like, we're stereotyping people and attributing things that are not necessarily a part of what's going on. So as far as this goes, uncertainty reduction theory has something to do with this, and you have a video on this. We are very uncomfortable with uncertainty, so we're always trying to reduce it. So when we seek out information about other people, or we want to know more and we want to get that information so we understand the situation, it's not necessarily because we want to gain information, it's because we want to reduce uncertainty. We do this in 3 basic ways. There's more to this, obviously, but the basic ways we do this are passive, which is just observing someone, not interacting with them at all. We could either observe them when they know that they're around other people and being observed, or when they think they're in private, like if they go around the corner at your school or whatever and they're on the phone and they don't know anybody's listening to them or hears them. Active strategy is inquiring. This used to mainly just be like talking to someone, asking someone else questions about a person, or about a thing. But now that we have social media, sometimes it just involves like looking people up. So sometimes we want to know more about a person, we might look them up on social media or online. And then interactive is just directly talking to this person. The thing is that we're so, and you'll see this in the video, we're so uncomfortable with uncertainty that when we're presented with something that contradicts what we want to believe to be true, or we, whether we want it or not, we do believe to be true, we tend to reject it. We want to push that away because I'm like, that means we're stepping into an area of uncertainty where we have to reevaluate a whole list of things to understand something. We're way more comfortable believing what we think to be true, even if it's like for example, people who don't think that climate change is real. It's like, here's all this evidence. They're like, no, I already believe this. Stepping to this other place means I have to step into an unknown place where I'm uncertain about it and learn all this other stuff. And that is, we we've evolved to want to reduce uncertainty or to avoid it completely, which can be really dangerous because this basically leans into a confirmation bias. And that's what that is. It's confirmation bias is when you seek out information to confirm what you already believe to be true. Now, this can be like really basic, whereas like you're watching news stations that are like along your political lines. Or you surround yourself with people who like are like-minded like you, which is kind of a normal type of confirmation bias. You're not necessarily going out and actively seeking out other opinions. Or it could be something really kind of insane. Where like there's a whole new like flat earth movement going on right now where people believe the earth is flat, and it's growing because of social media. And these people will literally just tell you like, oh, you think it's round? Well, it's flat because when you look out at the horizon, it looks flat. And you could tell them, well, the earth is so big that you can't see a curve because you're only able to see so many miles. It's really big. Like, how small do you think the earth is, right? And then you might present them with some other information. Like, well, if you go on this pole, it spins, you know, the stars move this way. If you go on the other pole, they spin the other way. And what they do is tend to just be like, that's not real. People just say that, or it's CGI, or whatever they say. They say all kinds of things. I've seen this. I've seen it on social media, where they say all kinds of things to kind of just like dismiss anything that contradicts what they want to believe to be true. And they'll even seek out information that that is just false. Like, look at this YouTube video of this random person making claims about science. I don't want to believe actual scientists. I'm just going to believe this random guy. I don't know who he is, because what he's saying fits what I already believe to be true. This is a really dangerous mindset to be in. That's when we need to step back and be like, maybe we need to step into uncertainty, because that's a better place to be in than to be in a place that is perpetuating some kind of falsehood. And sometimes those falsehoods hurt people. They hurt other people. COVID is an example of that, where people are like, I don't want to put on my mask, like, and they had all these excuses and all these reasons, and they would seek out information to confirm, even if it was false, to confirm what they believed to be true, and then they would spread COVID, and those people would spread COVID, and people literally died because of this. So confirmation bias in some situations can be really dangerous. It's very important that we're aware of it. Two things that affect this, or kind of like spawn off of this, is a halo effect and a horns effect. The greatest example I think of a halo effect is, it's not the only example. I just think it's such a good example. A halo effect is when you seek out information that like you want to like somebody, you like them already, so you kind of just like dismiss anything that's negative about them or anything that like contradicts your opinion, and you just see them as like this good person. And the horns effect is the opposite, where like maybe you don't want to like this person, you already don't like them, and then they do some good things, or they've done other things, or they get along with some of your friends, and you're like, I don't want to hear it. A halo effect, a good example of this, is like when maybe somebody starts dating someone and they ignore all the red flags and they're just like, but that one time when they got me flowers, or they did this for me, or they brought me to the airport, and all your friends might be saying, no, what about this, this, and this? And like, you might say like, but no. But sometimes maybe that person isn't that bad, and the friends instead have a horns effect against them. And so they instead only pick out the bad things, or the red flags, or maybe what they perceive to be red flags about somebody that you're dating, and they ignore all the good stuff. And so that would be a horns effect. And these are both forms of a confirmation bias. These are usually caused by a primacy effect, where people remember and judge most strongly the first thing that they see and hear. That's usually what happens. There's a primacy effect, which means what happens first. And they're like, I like this person right away, they want to stick with that, or I don't like this person right away, and they want to stick with that. And that kind of has to do with first impressions. And while first impressions don't determine how we think of somebody forever, they definitely frame how we see them forever. One of my best friends, when we first met, neither of us liked each other. I thought she was like really like uppity and like just kind of like we were working at the same restaurant, and I went to go get a basket of silverware, that she just rolled. She goes, "You can't take that one." And I was like, "Why not?" And she's like, "Because I just rolled that one for us, but you can take this one." And that one, the other one that she wanted me to take, was identical to the one I was about to take. And I was like, "What is the difference?" And the thing is, because that was like one of my first impressions of her, like 13 years later, I will still recognize those types of like the way she thinks when she thinks, or like she has those kinds of like cognitive patterns that are, I'm like, does this matter? Or like, you know what I mean? Is this logical? I will notice those more because that was my first impression. However, she's one of my best friends. I love her more than almost anything. So that didn't stick how I thought of her then, but I still noticed the things I didn't notice in the beginning. Halo and Horns effect in pop culture. If you've seen Game of Thrones, I saw this a lot with Daenerys Targaryen. People really liked her and they loved her, and that's the way she was framed. That's the way she was meant to come off to the audience for a purpose. For further details, read my thesis because that's kind of what it's about. But they set her up to be really loved, and then at the end, you're like, no, but I want to like her, so I'm going to excuse everything she did at the end. I'm not saying it was like wasn't rushed or anything, but the fact is that people excuse things because they've always liked her and they want to continue liking her. If you've seen Downton Abbey, Thomas Barrow is another example of the Horns effect. I have a Downton Abbey group on Facebook, and people are just like, I don't care what his character arc was. I hate him because he's a really terrible person at the beginning, and he has maybe one of the best character arcs in the whole series. But some people are like, no, I hate him forever. Like, and they don't want to let go of that. So this is really something that happens in real life. It happens when we're watching stories and all of that. All right. Pause just for a second and pick it back up. Okay, so as far as fundamental attribution errors go, what I just said about attributions, this is what this means. So you attribute somebody's internal traits to external factors, or things that are external factors. So maybe, you know, you see somebody like, well, let's actually go back to that hypothetical example people talk about in ethics. If you hear about somebody breaking into a pharmacy and stealing pharmaceuticals, you might immediately think like, well, they're typical criminal, or they're internally flawed in some way, or they're just going to steal those to make money, or whatever it is, or however you're thinking of it. Or maybe you know the situation, you know they're just stealing them to help somebody else, but you attribute it to some kind of internal flaw instead of thinking about the external factors that led them to that, right? We do this a lot with people because we tend to judge ourselves more charitably than we do others. If we're working with somebody and that person's late to work and we have to stay late waiting for them, maybe we already are like not buddy with them, we might attribute it to like just them being lazy or them being inconsiderate. But really, like, there was an external factor there, like their car broke down, or they got a flat tire, or there was a family emergency, or something like that. So this is a fundamental attribution error. We do this all the time. On the flip side, however, though, when it comes to us, we have a self-serving bias. And this is like I said earlier in the lecture, this is kind of contradictory because we are our own worst critics. We are hardest on ourselves when it comes to our self-concept and all that. Well, maybe for most of us, yeah, but some of us just think we're the best. So I don't know, but a lot of us, like, we're our own worst critics, but at the same time, we tend to have a self-serving bias. So when we perform poorly, we blame external factors, even when they're internal. I have done this when I took tests in college, and I remember like getting like a C on an exam once as an undergrad, and I never got C's. I mean, after I went back to school, taking 4 years off, I didn't get C's. And looking back, I knew it was my fault. I did. And I did at the time too, but I didn't want to like really face it. I knew it was because I was just overwhelmed, and I was like, look, just do your best, whatever. And like every day I would just kind of lower my standards. It was a self-fulfilling prophecy, really. And then when I got my grade back, I was like, they didn't know how to write the exam. That professor like was ambiguous with their their possible answers and this and that. And I just kind of like blamed an external factor for my, poor score. Or my average score is what a C is. But to me, it was like below average for what I had been doing for the past few years. So a self-serving bias is kind of the opposite of this fundamental attribution error. It's really, in some ways, it is kind of an attribution error, right? We're attributing something to the wrong thing. And that is really how we judge ourselves more charitably than we do others, in a nutshell. So to kind of like just wrap this up, as far as our expectations and the obvious, we assume things are obvious, but again, we don't have all the information. I used to, my last boyfriend and I, we used to always go to this bar, and we were friends with almost everybody there. And I'd been going there for years before he had, and he would like get in arguments, and sometimes I would just snap on him. And the people who didn't know us as well would be like, the obvious thing is that she's crazy or she's drunk or whatever. But really what was happening is that he would start drinking, and as soon as he would start drinking, he would get this face, and I'd be like, oh my God, here it's starting. And then he would just start like, why did you go to the bathroom right now? Who are you meeting in there? And it was just kind of like insane stuff, to where, I mean, he eventually got help. He got medication. He saw, but then he stopped taking it, and that's when we broke up. But like, it was insane. And like he would get really aggressive with me, and I would try to just be like, okay, just calm down. Like, it's not what are you talking about? But he would just keep going and going. And then I would just be like, stop it. Like, and I would just kind of yell, like, stop. And then people would be like, oh, Julie's crazy, right? So we kind of think things are the obvious. Sometimes they're not as obvious. Sometimes they are. Sometimes we're right when we see things. We're like, this looks like this. And sometimes it is like that. But other times, like, think back to that clip, that clip from SNL. And, Austin Butler is looking in this window, and he's like, this family is so happy. They're perfect. And inside, the woman's like, I cheated on your father. Like, you know what I mean? Things are not always obvious. And we also assume others are like us. Like, we hold the same standards to everybody else as we do ourselves. And that is a natural thing that humans do. However, it is ironically like the worst thing to do, because nobody else is like us completely. We're all different. Like, some people can handle some situations better than others. Some people have better support systems. Some people have better resources. Some people are already struggling with stuff. Some people have been abused in the same way as someone else has, but like their response is different because of various factors. None of us are the same, and to hold other people to the standard that we hold ourselves, or hold them to the standard of how we would react, is so completely unfair and just kind of, just wrong. I don't want to use another word for it, but it is wrong. There's no way. It's not just unfair, it's completely wrong, because we are not the standard of everybody else. Our cognitions, our judgments, our behaviors are not the golden standard to which everybody else should be measured against. And we do have to remember that. All right. And then just to improve your perceptions, think about these things. So when you're, be thoughtful when you seek explanations for things. Always be open-minded that there might be explanations that contradict what you assumed was the explanation. Consider the perspectives of the other person. Empathize with them. Remember, empathy is putting yourself in someone else's shoes, putting yourself in someone else's place, whether it's like a bad thing or a good thing that's happened to them, as if you were them, not as if you were you. So think of their perspective. And also think about consider their perspective or their opinions on things, whether or not you agree with them. Be open. This is cognitive complexity, Look beyond the first impressions. Always question your assumptions. Think about other possible explanations for what you're assuming. And then also consider the channel or the channels that are being used. Obviously, face-to-face is the richest channel. It's the best channel. You see people's faces. You can hear their tone and their voice. The lower you go, the more likely there is to be some kind of miscommunication. When you're on the phone, you can hear them, but you can't see them. If you're texting, we use emojis, which compensates, but it just goes on and on and on. Like the less rich the channel, the more likely there is going to be some kind of miscommunication, some kind of misperception. Okay. So that's it for perception. It's my favorite chapter. I don't know if you realized that when I went over it for so long. But I did kind of rush through this. We have a lot of videos to watch for this chapter. You will be watching some of them on your own. I wish we could watch them together in person though. So that's that. And yeah, have a great day or night or whatever it is.